The idea of unconditional love is something of a beautiful thing. The bonds of family transcending rational thought, the comforting feeling that you can be whoever you are and still have someone else you might not fully understand still love and respect you, camaraderie, friendship, Nakama, family. This idea is above all in fairy tale, even infinity, and it's one set out from the very beginning. Having left her home and father who placed little value in her existence, we start the series with Lucy fawning over the idea of being part of a guild. But not just any guild, fairy tale. We never know why she had her heart set on this guild specifically. If anything, they're always spoken poorly of. What with the tendency for assault and destruction they're practically known for. But those are petty problems caused by a group of rambunctious kids. And the moment Lucy takes in that atmosphere, for all the tomfooling chaos, it rapidly becomes like a new home to her. The thought of not being a fit for fairy tale becomes deeply upsetting to her when Phantom Lord tries to force her home, and only afterwards is she able to put into words what fairy tale means to her. Because it's the place where she's loved and respected, she's able to call it home when her father isn't able to offer that, treating her like property as she was forced home to be married off. Because Lucy would never be objectified or treated like property within fairy tale. It's like her real home, Makarov serving as a protective father figure to a gaggle of guildmates that serve as a surrogate family. Because no matter what happens, fairy tale is the perfect place. And while they have their own internal struggles, everyone's doing what they feel is most right. Being part of fairy tale is to be part of that family and receive that unconditional love. There's a problem here. This idea, the fundamental concept of fairy tale, is something impossible in its perfection. It's a large guild of like-minded youngsters, yet as a byproduct of the size, they can't each be given the attention they need to feel like they're truly an intrinsic part of the group, something that a position in the family would imply. Warren is said to be one of the most competent mages in the guild, yet his role in the story beyond being a background character is as a walkie-talkie through his telepathy magic, something he was never elevated beyond. He's nobody, and applying that descriptor to anyone in fairy tale rebukes the point of the guild. How many other characters would have met the same fate had they not been lucky? Levy was set up to be a background character forever, but as luck would have it, she was targeted and crucified. Up to this panel, her and her friends had been given a smattering of dialogue and cover pages explaining more details of their magic and their team. Then she's victimized, and we're supposed to care now. To be fair, why shouldn't we? They're mages of fairy tale. They should obviously be treated as such. How would the audience feel if it was Lucy and Gray strung up there? Mashima immediately attempts to make up the difference. Lucy being distraught is given added context in the next chapter when we're shown a flashback. They've always been friends now, and the scene succeeds in helping the audience understand Lucy's emotions if nothing else. But the timing of it could not be more awkward. It's far too late to have any emotional impact for the audience, yet the same emotions that are so disconnected are the driving force behind the guild's actions. Not that having the connection laid out earlier would have made the emotional manipulation any less obvious, because a short scene with Levy wouldn't have cured her lack of relevance. I see this moment as having two possible meanings. One is that it was intended to show that no matter how insignificant the member of fairy tale might seem, they are still a part of the guild and deserve to be treated as such when made to suffer despite lacking in main character status. Or, Mashima fleshed them out a bit when writing their bios on the cover pages, took a liking to Levy and did more with her. It's only natural that she persisted after a spotlight. Were Levy to simply return to the background, the bloated cast would only be more of an issue in regards to the levels of importance. Levy's moment of spotlight being a brief obtrusion that shows how any member of fairy tale can be important if something bad happens so a real member can come help them, strengthening the dichotomy between importance and negligible rather than breaking it down. How then is the fairy tale guild capable of expressing the ideas of closeness and family? As much as it's true of the main group, those on the fringes end up forgotten. How can Wakaba ever feel like a member of fairy tale when all he does is sit in the background and smoke? Does Vegeta have some deep reason for dancing that ties back to the main plot or any other character? Are we ever going to see more of Mickey's team? Of course not, because that's not Mickey, it's Chico. This is Mickey. Because if you have to Google the members of your family to keep them straight, then can they truly be considered part of the family? Having this discrepancy only muddies the thematic waters, but we're still paddling over to the deep end here, because the idea of fairy tale's family is not one deeply rooted in blood, instead being on ideals. Yet so often, the deepest bonds between characters come from that arbitrary connection. What would Elfman be willing to do for his siblings that he wouldn't do for the rest of the guild? Because when Tartarus has both of his sisters in their clutches, he is ordered to take a lacrima bomb to the guild to destroy it. Even before nothing comes of it, the only reason he went through with it in truth had nothing to do with his sisters, because he was being mind-controlled, absolving him of any wrongdoing before it even happened. As a result, there is no actual conflict of interest between the things Elfman wants to protect. He's just a pawn without any sort of control over what he's doing rather than a meaningful agent in his own slice of the story. And even without the context of a shared upbringing, the far more distant Kana and Gildarts are given a similar deep connection despite their lack of a real bond. After Kana tells Gildarts of their relation, the womanizer rattles off a number of ladies he'd been with, before recalling the name of Kana's mother Cornelia, saying she was the one woman he loved enough to marry, and that Kana couldn't have been anyone else's daughter. It's supposed to be a heartfelt moment, but given Gildarts' personality and the core ideas of the guild, it stumbles and falls. Kana taking fairy glitter to defend the guild at the expense of her relation with Gildarts leans into the idea of their relation being arbitrary, which would be more in line with the themes of the series. The rest of the guild has been more of a family to her than Gildarts ever had or even would come to, as he proceeds to leave the story after the time skip until the final arc. But instead you have Gildarts the womanizer saying he'd like to share a drink with his hot daughter he barely knows. If this instead followed the realization from the two of them that Kana was already enough of an adult not to need a father figure, and that Gildarts is kind of a shitty dad anyway, then this unfatherly offer could have been a chance to recontextualize their relationship as one of guildmates who just happen to be related to the same woman. This would allow the two to have a positive relationship, but not one defined by their blood ties. Because in lending so much credence to these deep bonds within the group that's already supposed to have them intrinsically, it further cheapens the whole. Makarov's the father of the guild, but taking things at face value, how is his sexual harassment of Lucy supposed to match up to Gildarts and Kana? This focus on blood seems strange when compared to Laxus' arc, as his discontent partly arises because he feels obligated to the position of guildmaster due to his blood. Before this, his prior characterization set him at odds with the guild, through his bullying of Natsu or demanding Mira Jane's strip for his pleasure. Him going full-blown antagonist is hardly surprising, as he makes most of the women in the guild helpless and pits everyone else against each other in mortal combat while his lackeys mop up those who squeak by. And as if threatening the lives of his guildmates weren't enough, after the hostages are freed he put the entire town under threat of destruction. His obsession with that arbitrary blood tie puts him in the climax, where Natsu and Gajeel push him to the brink, forcing him to use Fairy Law, a spell that targets only those he's deemed enemies. But rather than end the fight by destroying the guild he's so at odds with, in part because of his conflict with their idea of camaraderie, the spell fizzles, because deep in his heart, Laxus still sees the guild as his family. In what fucking way? Up to this point in the manga, Laxus has done nothing redeemable. Mystagon barely has any connection to this world, yet he fights against him. Freed comes to regret going along with Laxus. The only thing going for him is that Natsu says he hasn't done anything wrong, arguing that infighting isn't uncommon, yet he doesn't retract his words the moment Laxus takes the fight outside against Innocence with Thunder Palace. But at the end of the day, Laxus gets a slap on the wrist and is sent off with a smile, a silent send-off being given to indicate that he'll still be part of the family despite being separate. While this is in line with the intended themes of not accepting shitbags into your family for being shitbags like Ivan, the way Laxus gets off so easily hints at a bigger problem in what being a Fairy Tail member means in regards to the narrative as a whole. Those graced by Fairy Tail being blessed with Mashima's kindness, like it's a cult. Fairy Tail within its own narrative is perfect. They're God. They're above God. When their home continent of Ishgar is under threat of the massive Elvera's empire, as Ajeel gloats that God has abandoned them, Natsu claims that Fairy Tail will watch over the continent in God's place. From the very beginning of the story, it's established that the only authority Fairy Tail bows to is itself, brushing off complaints from the Magic Council with no comeuppance except a couple old men around a table getting pissy, while Jalal, the most important character at said table, laughs along with Fairy Tail at the helplessness of the council. It's not just the likes of Laxus getting away without punishment. Natsu shows up at the Magic Games after the second time skip, and during the finals, we find out that the winning team was only using part of their strength, toying with their opposition. Considering how shady they look, this seems to be a negative, painting them in a bad light for when Natsu comes in and trounces them effortlessly, burning down the entire arena, costing millions in the process, and probably killing some poor old ladies by giving them heart attacks. Sure, they were pretending to be weaker, but they would have won anyway. Why are they the bad guys for putting on more of a show for the audience that wanted to enjoy the yearly event, while Natsu is undercutting their earned victory by vandalizing royal property while the king just laughs about kids being kids? What about Adolis? This is a society that functions more heavily on magic than Earthland. As the two Urzas fight, Nightwalker laments about the fear, anxiety, and hopelessness of losing such a precious resource, one intrinsic to the functioning of their society. Housing, lighting, cooking, military. Adolis losing magic would be like our modern society losing electricity or internet. With the logistics of an entire, no doubt planet-wide smattering of civilizations falling down overnight, the ensuing conflict over what resources remain would be devastating. Mystagon's words of hope might extend to his kingdom, but alternate Alvara's, or 7, isn't so lucky. All Urza Scarlet has to alleviate that fear is the insistence that humanity will live on just like the two of them, now having expended their magic. And she's probably right, but in equating the individual to the collective, she neglects that for the humanity of Aeolus to take such a beating, thousands will die while she gets to go back to her fun world of magic and relative peace. Nightwalker's desperation is the strongest emotional connection I've had with a character in Fairy Tail, yet the narrative insists that she's wrong, because only Fairy Tail is right. Fairy Tail's enemies are the perpetrators of so many crimes: sexual assault, kidnapping, terrorism, sexual assault, destruction of property, elder abuse, destroying the world. But then you have Fairy Tail and their collection of good deeds: sexual assault, kidnapping, terrorism, sexual assault, destruction of property, elder abuse, destroying the world, sexual assault. At the end of the series, the guild serves as possibly the single strongest bastion of power in the entire world, its members having fended off the entire Alvera's empire, their forces made up of 730 guilds, with only the help of a measly 5. And yet not once are they ever put into check for their own actions. This is Fairy Tail's perfect family under Mashima's indifferent guidance. There is no punishment, no consequence, no real threat, and no meaningful conflict. And the result is just a heartless indifference masked by the appearance of caring more than anything. Because that's what the logical conclusion of an uncaring, unconditional love is. And what kind of family is one built on that hollow love? Not much of one at all. Not sick of me talking shit about shonen stuff? Well, on the channel MathWiz97 you can find the podcast in which the two of us are going to discuss a whole lot of action-adventure shonen manga, starting with Naruto. Oh yeah, and support me on Patreon and shit. Like Volkyan and Isaac Garland. And MathWiz.